JJ Emmanuel, you are a therapist and a counselor, a marriage counselor, and a psychotherapist in qualifications. You are out of Ontario, Canada, and you can be found at emmanueltherapy.com. Welcome to Listening with Leaders.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the therapy world.
Good question. So a little bit about me is that I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, which is on the opposite end of the country. I grew up Orthodox Jewish and still Orthodox Jewish today. And growing up in a city like Vancouver, where there's not much Orthodox Jewish or Jewish at all, not many people that.
It's a very secular. It's a very secular city.
Yeah. Very, very secular. Very different than what it was like in my home. And when you grow up like that, you kind of start to consider things differently. You look at the world a little differently. You want to see, like, where do I fit? How do things line up? What am I doing differently? Why am I doing it differently? And then, yeah, over time, as I grew up and as I continued to grow up, I developed an interest in counseling, psychotherapy, the therapy world in general, but in specific people's individualized approaches to values, meaning, purpose, and how they align themselves with the world around them. And that kind of led me into this field. That's the vague answer.
What is it about yourself that you think uniquely qualifies you or makes you different from all the other therapists and psychotherapists and counselors that are out there?
I think there are a couple things. One of them is my background, how I grew up. I have a very unique place in the world. I was raised to intentionally live around people that have different perspectives from you. So I was raised, part of the value system I was raised with was that it is essential to be around people who don't see the world the same way as you, which is always true. Nobody sees the world the same way as anybody else. But to seek out people who are different, not to seek out people who are the same. So from a young age, my development included curiosity about others. That's part of how I was raised. That's my parents planted that in my DNA, maybe even before I was born. And that was our home. Our home was like that as well. So that's part one. I would say that's who I am, and I think that is unique. I wasn't raised to seek out people who are like me, which is, I think it's different.
So you're pretty curious about people who are, you have a very deep curiosity about people who are different than you are.
Very much so, yeah. So much so that it was hard for me at times to interact with people who are the same or seem the same.
Like
so much so that
other Orthodox Jewish people who had the same values and beliefs.
Yeah, which is funny, by the way, because it totally contradicts my value system. I want to be a curious guy, and I'm making all these assumptions about people who are, like me, but what do I know about them? So that's the one end. On the other end, I think I take a fairly direct approach to my job, and in that I mean, I think the safe space of therapy is very important. It's essential. But I think I strive to bring more than that to therapy. I strive to bring a set of tools and skills that I can help my clients to insert into their lives. I don't want to say to use all the time, but to kind of plant them in where needed. And while that's not different than any other therapist per se, I put a, and we've spoken about this before, Doug, that I put a very intense pressure on myself to perform, so much so that sometimes it harms the way that I perform in work and otherwise. I'm not sure if that answered the question. You told me.
That's okay. Yeah. So I think you work with men, and you also do some couples work.
Yes.
Tell me about what's drawing you to work with men. What are the kinds of problems that they come to you with?
I think it's firstly just such an important. It's so funny because it's so broad, men. Like it's not a, it's one of the sexes, but it's. We are raised societally and by our families, whatever, all the context around us as men, really not to approach our emotions. I don't want to say to hide them or to pretend they're not there. We're not trained to approach our emotions. And I mean,
right. We are not trained to be emotionally competent.
Yeah, not at all.
And our upbringing, a lot of our upbringing is emotions are bad. Emotions are feminine. Emotions are irrational. Emotions allow you to be exploited and make you weak.
Yeah.
And so this whole cultural concept of emotions versus the rugged individualist, which, by the way, never existed. It's a myth. I mean, I think that's what you're referring to.
Very much so. It's, you look back at like the Old Testament, the Bible, where I come from, what we look at all the time, and all of our heroes were gentle giants. They cried for loss that they experienced, and they mourned things. They got excited, very happy.
Passionate at times.
Passionate. They experienced the highs and the lows, and they experienced them, and they made something of those moments. And that's not what we as men do. And I'm talking about myself as well. It's funny because, again, my work is to help people unlock these skills or to open up some awareness. And I find myself every day, all the time, doing the total opposite. I'm a walking contradiction, but it's a lifelong process. It's not just like,
right,
open it up and then now I'm emotionally aware and competent and I can identify what I'm feeling. It doesn't work like that.
It's a growth process.
Yeah, very much so.
You do get to a point where you can say, I am emotionally self-aware. I do know what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling X. And you do get to that level. And actually, you can get to it quicker than most people imagine with the right tools. So are men coming to you because they want to change, or because they've hit something in their life that requires them to change? Or they're just feeling so much pain they need to find a different way of being?
I think all of the above.
Okay.
A lot of times men come to me because of, an issue with a spouse or an issue with a parent. But very, very quickly, many times, very, very quickly, you'd be surprised at how quickly men will identify an early relationship dynamic with their parents. So they're not coming to try to solve something from their past, but they point to that really quickly. This is how my mom did it when I was 5. What we're talking about, like how you got angry at a pickup basketball game. Why are you talking about when you're 5 years old?
It's totally formative.
Yeah.
Because because what's happening is at 5 and 6 years old, the child is learning for the first time that he's living in an emotionally unsafe world. Exactly. His mom is no longer there for safety.
Exactly.
And it's really hurtful. And so the little boys, it happened to me, you start wrapping yourself up in concrete. So that you don't feel the hurt. And you can put on a strong face in front of everybody and be socially accepted.
Yeah. And that's the key. There you go. That's what I was getting to. I like that you said that too, because it's the presenting problem. If I were to generalize, is a desire to be socially accepted.
It's every human's need to be heard, to be appreciated, and to be loved.
Yeah, exactly.
And how can you be that way if you don't love yourself, you don't appreciate yourself, you can't hear yourself? How can
Not at
you
all.
expect other people to do the same for you?
One of the questions I ask a lot of my clients, it's not part of a specific line of questioning, but it comes up often, is if you have children, what do you do for your child when your child is upset?
Yes.
And immediately I pick them up, I hug them, I ask them if they're okay, I check in on them, I try and understand what the issue is. All these things they don't do for themselves. Not ever.
Right.
Ever.
Right. But they're okay doing it with the children.
Yeah.
I know. It's very strange. Talk to me about, you do some couples work too.
Yes.
And what in couples work, what is it that you're trying to help them work through?
So in couples work, there's this interesting cycle that I see with couples, is that people have a belief that they need to be supportive or nurturing, which is true, 100%. There's an innate desire to do that. But so much so that when they see a breakdown in the relationship, it's almost like hit the panic button. I'm obviously doing my job wrong. Now I'm going to retreat. And then I'm not going to be able to do my job anymore. And this vicious cycle happens, right? And from both sides.
Right.
Because nobody wants to upset their partner, their spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, whoever it is. And that's what I'm seeing mostly. You might have somebody who's saying, my spouse cheated on me. They have a habit that they're hiding from me. You might have somebody who's saying that we fight all the time. People who are very distant. And it very frequently, almost all of the time, comes down to the same issue, which is that the expectation of the individuals involved in the relationship is distorted slightly.
So the way I see it,
Yeah,
from the peacemaker's perspective, not the therapist,
yeah,
is that oftentimes when couples come to each other because of love and because of lust, and then that eventually grows into love. But if they're dysfunctional, they carry with them expectations that my needs are going to be met, even though I don't have to. I may not even know what my expectations are, but I just know that my true love is going to take care of me and meet all of my emotional and physical expectations without me having to say anything.
Yep.
And that's very infantile, because that's exactly how you were as an infant. Mom and dad had to read into, you got a little baby, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Mom and dad have to take care of the little baby because the baby can't meet his or her own needs. And so for the first year or two of life, that's what mom and dad do. They take care of needs. And so now that gets transmuted in adulthood to thinking that my true love is going to fulfill me and take care of all my own needs. And that's just not how it works. And so you've got two people who have these unstated assumptions and expectations that get they get shattered by behavior because the needs aren't getting met, and now all of a sudden you have conflict.
Yeah. And that's like, I think it's like the flip side of the same coin. I think we're talking about the same thing. Whereas I'm looking at it from like what they believe the role of a caretaker is, and what you're saying is from the role of the taken care of.
Right.
The infant.
I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, totally.
And from my perspective as a peacemaker and your perspective as a therapist, I think we have the same solution. Get them to listen to each other.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Well, actually it is. I mean, from my perspective, it is.
Yeah.
Because I teach them, and I've shared these skills with you, I teach them how to listen each other into existence. So when I'm dealing with a difficult conversation between a couple, first thing I tell them is, this is not about talking, this is about listening. And you're going to ignore the words and only listen to the emotions. And I'll have the couple sit down, and I've done this on Zoom, and I've of course done it in person. And I'll say, who's going to start? And somebody starts. And then the listener, I will start listening to that person's emotions, and I'll reflect back their emotions. I'll ignore their words. All I'm doing, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're upset, you don't feel heard, you don't feel what. There's a whole process for doing this.
Yeah.
And then I'll have the other partner repeat what I just did. And you can just see the speaker decompress, because now, for the first time, deeply heard, feels deeply heard.
Yeah.
And then we reverse the roles. And in the beginning, it's a little tough for them because they've never gotten the idea of how to listen to emotions.
Yeah.
But in conflict situations, it immediately de-escalates the anger and the upset. And I'm thinking in difficult conversations, it transforms the difficult to transform it. I mean, it takes a difficult conversation and makes it a transformative conversation.
Yeah.
Because now we're really at the core of where people are at their emotional level.
And that's interesting that you say that also, because it's part of my job as a therapist is to assess if people are ready to do the work.
Right.
And sometimes it's not the case.
Right.
But generally speaking, when a couple comes in, they're half ready. They want something new. They want a different approach. They want to do a better job, and they want to feel better, but they also want to feel heard. Which it seems like those two work against each other.
No.
But in fact, it's not how it works at all. It's
exactly.
When you pour into that listening funnel, you actually join forces.
That's right. Because as the listener, you are serving your partner by being the listener. And as the speaker or the storyteller, you are now getting the opportunity to be listened into existence, to be deeply, deeply heard. And so it strengthens the relationship where one is serving, the other is receiving, and then they flip roles and do it exactly the opposite. It's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Extremely powerful. So how important is listening in your work? Kind of a dumb question, I guess, huh?
It's not actually. No, because I think also, I think I've mentioned this to you before, specifically to you, that so listening is important in my work. Listening is important. It's an important skill to train my clients, but it's important for me. And it may sound like a stupid question, but it's really not, because when you feel highly trained at something, or when you feel like you have a job to do, you lose sight of, or I lose sight, I can speak for myself. I often lose sight of what the actual mission is. I'm looking for outcomes. And it's funny because one of the things that I'm talking about with my clients all the time is we're not outcome-driven people. When we're driven by outcomes, that's where anxiety starts to happen, because
Right.
we lose track of that mission in the middle, that journey. And so listening is essential. And not just listening to what I want to hear. I'm not looking for points so that I can get, to my method. I don't want to hear talking points so that I can say, oh, this is what you do with that. Anxiety, acceptance. Anger, acceptance. Relationship issues, listening. I can't just point when I hear. I have to really listen to what's going on. I have to be willing to accept the possibility that I don't know the answer. That's how deeply important listening is. I have to let myself absorb the entire picture, knowing in full well that it's entirely possible I don't have the answer. And when I do that, I often do come to the answer.
Right. And the trick to that is not allowing your own inherent filters or your spin doctors inside your brain to spin what you're hearing to what you want to hear,
right.
as opposed to what you should be hearing.
Right.
That's part of the reason why I find that listening to emotion and reflecting emotion is so powerful, because there's no room for spin.
Right.
What you're doing is focusing on what you're feeling, what are your emotional experiences, and then restating it to you, reflecting it to you. And they're your emotions. So I can't spin what you're feeling. I can only reflect what you're feeling.
Right, it's a great point. And it also opens up the opportunity for clarification or
That's right.
clarification, a
Exactly.
conversation, real talk.
Exactly. How much listening do you do in your personal life with your family?
I try.
Is it strange that you can be an expert and on the outside,
Yeah.
on the inside, in your personal life, it maybe not as optimal as it you would expect it to be.
Totally. And it's fun again, as a therapist, again, I was just speaking with another therapist recently about how easy it is to develop this complex about your identity and your job. It's so easy to get caught up in being a professional life liver because you're a therapist, but you're not. And we really have to take a lot of our own advice and probably often seek therapy on our own or counseling in some capacity, because your job is to live, to listen. And then it's almost like sometimes you want a break to just be heard. You know what I'm saying?
I do. The need to be heard is so powerful, and it's so often unfulfilled.
Yeah.
That you will talk and talk and talk and talk because you want to be heard. When and the problem is that the people around you don't know how to listen, so that your need is unrequited, and it just gets more and more frustrating, and you feel more and more alienated.
Yeah. And that's a common theme amongst therapists specifically.
Yeah, the therapists are doing all the listening, but they have a need to be heard themselves.
Yeah.
And there's nobody the therapist can go to be listened to.
Yeah.
And I would think professionally too, there's probably a code of toughness, right? We can hear the worst and deal with the worst, and it's not going to affect us.
And that's the constant paradox of this career.
Right.
It's this, you're fighting all the same battles, and maybe on this like one step higher, because you've put yourself on this, like, I'm a therapist. Welcome to my office.
Right.
And you really have to, you have to be humble, but you also have to give yourself credit and allow yourself to experience feeling. Listen to yourself.
Right. So how do you engage in self-care?
A few different ways. I'll be honest, since I had a kid 5 weeks ago, not very well.
Well, you're at a stage in life where you're not getting a lot of sleep.
Yeah. Yes, tired is not the word.
Right.
But in general, so exercise is important for me. Very important for me. Like, I'm a big guy, and I lug around a lot of weight. So it's important for me to get a lot of sweat in every day. You got to do that. That's one thing. It clears my mind. It's a time to think, or it's a time to not think at all. It's time to just focus on one thing, or focus on I'm in my own zone, and I can do that. That's one thing. Interestingly enough, like, Jewish learning is something that's important for me as well. The theme amongst the things that I do for self-care are that they're things that I feel align with my value system or my belief system. So it's not necessarily things, I don't need to take a nap, or I don't need to smoke a cigar. I don't need to have a whiskey. You know what I mean? And sometimes it could be something that totally might seem like it would drain someone entirely, but it's something that I feel is essential to my life. So self-care to me, that's what it really means. It's not, I don't need to unwind. Some part of that might be unwinding, but that's only an element of the self-care map that I have. So it's like a variety of things. Let's say exercise, engaging in my religious practices, reading things that interest me in my own sports, like playing sports, watching sports, reading about sports. All these little things contribute to self-care. It's just me feeling like I'm doing the things that align with me.
Good. And that you keep you relaxed and so you're not and unbottled up, more expansive.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would imagine being a new father is probably a new experience too.
Yes. It is a new experience. It's a wild thing. It's a wild miracle.
So if you were to think about what advice you could give to people based on what you've learned so far in your life as a therapist and a counselor in terms of striving for balance and happiness, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's a good question. Could you repeat the question again? Just
if you think about everything that you've learned and everything you've experienced in your practice, working with many different kinds of people in many different kinds of situations, if you were to give advice to somebody about how to live a happier, more fulfilled life, what would you tell them?
I think two things. One is that you are okay, and it sounds a little cliche, but it's true, and I mean it very deeply. I mean to say that in terms of full acceptance of your whole reality, all the things that happened to you before, all things that are happening now, all the things you think and feel because of those are all part of the picture, and that's you. You don't need to get rid of those things. So that's one thing. You're okay. And the other thing is that while it is important to be part of society, community, and to live according to societal norms, it's also important to recognize that we have individualized value systems and that we can live by those, and we can live by those value systems according to those values, even as we integrate into different societies or societies that look different to our internal society.
So we can, what you're saying is that we don't have to compromise on our values, in order to live by our values. We may have to be creative about how we live and may have to be thoughtful about how we live, but compromising on those things that are important to us is unnecessary.
Yeah, unnecessary, and it can be hurtful, because that's when we do that, we start to really lose ourselves, and you'll pick it up 15 years later and think about, where was I?
Exactly. All right, one more question.
Yeah.
A little more. Well, I've asked you a lot of personal questions. This one's kind of fun.
I like personal.
This one's kind of fun. What's the one thing about you, JJ, that we wouldn't know unless you revealed it to us?
Oof. I guess you'll never know. I'm just kidding. One thing you wouldn't know unless I revealed it to you. Very open.
Something unusual, something different.
What is unusual and different about me? Or that I do? Oof, that's a good question. How specific, or
Whatever comes to your head.
all right, fine. This is the one that comes to my head after really thinking this one over. When I was, I say 7 or 8 years old, I fell down. I fell down an escalator. Nothing serious. That's why I'm laughing. Honestly, even if it was serious at this point, I'd probably laugh. And I don't think I went on a down escalator until I was 14.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. You never would have known that.
You would have never known that. That's pretty. That's the perfect answer. Those are the kind of answers I'm looking for.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you, JJ, so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Been a lot of fun.
I did as well. I did as well.
Take care.
All right, Doug, take care.